All right, welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I'm Abby Robbins.
And I'm Kimberly Culbertson.
And we are continuing our journey around the Enneagram, talking about each one of the types in the terms of what are they all called?
The centers, the stances, and the conflict resolution styles.
There we go.
Yes.
Today we're talking about type 4.
Type 4.
I have a special place in my heart for type 4s.
Yeah, you do.
Because I'm married to one.
And on your arm.
And on my arm, that's right. Yeah, right there. I mean, you can't see it because I didn't raise my arm up far enough. But I do have a tattoo. You can see it on Instagram. It's very cool. So with type 4, we're looking at the center. The dominant center of intelligence is the heart center. Right. The stance is the withdrawn stance. Mm-hmm. And the conflict resolution style is emotional realness. So we have heart, realness, withdrawn, emotional realness. And man, if that doesn't describe the
does
type
sum
4,
it right up.
It's very very poignant. So lead us off with the dominant center, so the heart center. How does that show up for type 4?
Well, the type 4 is in the heart center, and they're kind of rounding it out. So right after the 4, we're going into the head center. And so the 4 is living in their emotional life. And just making their decisions from how things feel in kind of that internal way. So specifically, it really looks like the 4 having kind of a romanticized internal world that they go to as they're trying to figure out who they want to be and how they want to show up in the world.
Yeah. So we talk about the dominant center of intelligence. We talk about the heart center as the image types. And I think that we see this play out most acutely for type 4s. Now, obviously, 3s have an image that they're trying to cultivate. But 4s, it's my experience at least is that with 4s, it's a little more obvious. 4s are... And it's obvious because the image that they're trying to cultivate is almost always one of distinction from those around them, where the type 3 is trying to be the poster child or really blend in. The 4 is kind of intentionally trying to stand out.
Yeah, I think the 3 is kind of trying to put their image out for you, but the 4 is trying to curate their image to match their internal uniqueness. So they're curating it for them more than for you. But it's still that highly curated, this is who I am. And they're always kind of workshopping who they are at the same time.
Yeah. And I think, truly, I might go as far as to say that I think 4s think that they're cultivating this image for themselves. But it is actually for other people. I talk with Danielle a lot, and we talk about this phenomenon of she so desperately wants to be seen, and then is utterly repulsed by the idea of being seen.
There's a real push-pull between wanting to be known. So the fantasy is someone will really get me and know me. Yeah. But wanting to be so unique that it's hard to be known. So as soon as they're known, it's am I cookie cutter now? Am I not unique enough? And so there's that push-pull all the time.
And really, we see the push-pull dynamic play out in almost every aspect of the 4's life. This is, there are 2 types who do push-pull the most, and that is 4 and 6. And we'll talk about 6 when we get to the head center. But for type 4, it really is, I often use the line from the Postal Service, such great heights, everything looks perfect from far away. 4s, along with 1s and 7s, are also an idealist.
Sure, yeah.
And so there is this sense of there is a romantic ideal. There is a they see what's missing is how it's described most often. If you're in a room, they know who's not there. They know they can. This shows up over and over again. And so when something is far away to the 4, it looks really good and really desirable, and they want that, and they may move towards it or try to draw that in. But then whether it's a person, a situation, an event, etc., gets closer, the 4 can see the reality of it which is very different than their romantic ideal about it. And then they have to reckon with that difference, and that usually results in
kind of a push away.
A push away.
Yeah.
Not always, but usually.
You seem a little familiar with this particular pattern.
As the object of a lot of push-pull, like, yes, I can definitely share it from my side of it. But really what we're seeing is kind of, I think the push-pull dynamic really blends together the withdrawn stance and the emotional realness in a way that is very, very unique to type 4s. So when we talk about the stance, we talk about the withdrawn stance. 4s are in the withdrawn stance with 9s and 5s. And this means that they're body repressed.
Okay.
It is the body is the least active center of intelligence. It's the least accessible. And how that plays out for 4s is there's a lot of trouble initiating. So 4s may cultivate this whole look and persona, but they often struggle to live that out fully.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and struggle to move it into action. It reminds me of, when I was a little girl, I would play Barbies, and I always we would play like all of this setting up of the house, and then when it came to like time to actually make the dolls do a thing, all my friends were like, I'm done. And I was like, but let's do a thing.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a certain amount of like you're setting it up so that it's going to be perfect. But then when you move it into action, there's just some resistance about bringing that all the way out into the world.
Yeah, that really brings an interesting piece of like the conflict between an idealist and someone within the withdrawn stance that is really unique to type 4, right? Because we have an idealist in type 1 in the compliance stance, and we have an idealist in type 7 in the assertive stance. And the way that 1s and 7s work with their ideals is very different than type 4. And so it does feel like there's this like conflict playing out for the type 4 almost constantly, right? That they can see, they can cultivate and get to this idea of perfect. But then when you start to act anything out, when you start to play something out, when you move into the reality of a situation, it's never that way.
Yeah, it's almost like if I act on this, if I really fully move into it, then it will be ruined because it won't be perfect anymore.
Yeah. That is, wow. Yeah, I'm kind of sitting with like the impact of that, and I'm like, wow, that sucks for y'all 4s. I'm really sorry. That is, well, and I think it goes hand in hand with this repression of the body center.
Sure.
So someone like an 8 or like a 7, where the body center is a lot more accessible, it's not dominant for you, but it's pretty high up there.
Sure.
There's a sense in the body center when you have more access to it that like you can kind of roll with the punches. Right, that like you can handle or manage whatever comes up because you're here, you're present, you can work with it. There's enough initiatory energy to continue moving forward, and 4s don't have that. And so if they encounter this imperfection or this something that's outside of the ideal, it can feel overly defeating. And I'm just like sitting with like how kind of sad that is and how hard that must be for type 4s.
I think it probably feels sadder to us as assertive types than it would to like type 4s as withdrawing types.
Which brings us to a wonderful point about 4s. They like being sad and distraught.
Well, and they like their internal world. They like the intensity of emotion. And so it's not only being sad and distraught, but they can also go, for example, 4s tend to be really tuned into beauty.
Yes.
And so they can go to some place internally where they're more tuned into beauty.
Yeah.
As a 7, I love hanging out with 4s because you're never bored.
Yeah.
Because they've got all that emotional realness and they've got this like artistic sense of like where the very cool things are. They're curating something unique that you can experience. And so I always want to stand right next to the 4s.
Yeah.
And then I learned once, I had a mentor who's a 4, and she thought I was a 2, so she told me how much she really just hates 7s. And I was like, what? Because 4s just find our optimism very irritating sometimes.
Yes, that is. Now, I will say, Danielle loves you.
Oh, thanks.
And of
I think
all
I've been an acquired taste for Danielle also.
to be true, I think everything is an acquired taste for 4s. Like if
maybe,
if it's not kind of like immediately in line with their aesthetic, it may take.
Sure.
4s take a long time to warm up. Let's just be very clear. But the clients that I've worked with, the 4s over the years, they almost all unanimously report being highly irritated by 7s. But I do think it is two wildly different approaches to the same idealism.
Sure, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Where 7s kind of, they envision the ideal world and they immediately create it. 4s feel stifled and can't create that same ideal. And then in their need to be unique and individual, they've cultivated kind of the darker side or the more challenging side of their emotional world, and can often write off 7's optimism and joy as something that is not real enough, quote unquote.
Yeah. And I think part of the work of a 7 is like I've done some work to be less obnoxious in my silver liningness, and that probably helps as well.
Yeah.
But I think where 7s see the ideal and they're like, okay, let's go get that. I think 4s see the ideal and then they immediately cue into the gap between what it is and what the ideal would be.
They feel the gap.
They lament it because they're in that withdrawing stance.
Yeah.
They don't move straight into action. I'm not likely to spend a lot of time lamenting. I'm likely to just go like, well, how can we fix it? Let's go.
And the emotional realness really comes in here in the lament, right? Like the emotional realness is like, oh, there's something missing and that's not okay. And we're going to feel the grief of that. We're going to feel the sadness and the pain of that gap, that disconnection, where 7s kind of pole vault themselves over the gap and into the ideal. That's a really interesting piece. And I think it leads to something that like Danielle and I have talked about and Danielle wanted me to bring up and I kind of want to bring up because a lot of 4s and 9s get mistyped. And I should say a lot of 9s, especially female 9s, mistype as type 4.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think generally speaking, a lot of women mistype as 4s nowadays because the 4 has kind of become the feminine ideal, right? Where 30, 40 years ago, the feminine ideal was much more 2-ish. Our societal norms have shifted to where 4 is much more desired. But the real kind of key difference between 9s and 4s, and when we see this, I see this mistype a lot because the energies can be very similar because they're both so withdrawn.
Right.
And 9s can also carry a lot of sadness, right? Like being as disconnected from the world that they want to be connected to. There is a lot of grief and sadness there. But the biggest difference that I've seen and kind of one of the most kind of dead giveaways is that 4s with their emotional realness, I should also say both are very passive aggressive. That is very real. That's one of the reasons where we get a lot of overlap. But 4s in particular, the phrasing that Danielle and I use is that 4s weaponize their melancholy.
Okay.
So when a 9 is experiencing these harder emotions, they're really trying to keep it under wraps, even from themselves.
Sure.
Right? They don't want other people to know. They don't even want to know. They don't want to rock the boat. When a 4 is experiencing these emotions, they want you to know.
They're sharing that experience with you.
They are forcing that experience on you. And they can really cultivate that damsel in distress kind of vibe. Like but the fun thing that we talk about is like, okay, well, Danielle might be playing the damsel in distress, but like she built the tower, she built the boat, she put the alligators in there that I have to like get over. And that is essentially like weaponizing melancholy with that emotional realness and the withdrawn stance, right? The fours are going to pull back when they're feeling big emotions. But it's very, very important to them that you understand their big emotions. And so because they're pulling back, they're kind of projecting a lot of this negativity or pain or grief or whatever it may be. They're making sure that it's known, even if they're not willing to like necessarily own up to the vulnerable experience of being like, I'm upset, here's why. It's more like, I'm going to withdraw, but I'm really upset and you need to come figure out why.
Yeah, and I think part of that idealized version of their partner or their friend is that they will be able to get over the moat and the alligators, and they'll come to the rescue. Whereas, you know, with the 9, they don't want to acknowledge the moat or the alligators or anything, you know, and because the 9's not in that emotional realness, they're real busy saying like, I'm not really sad. Yeah. Like, actually, my friends are okay because of this, you know, because they're in that positive outlook. Yeah. They're trying to kind of spit shine.
And even
the
if
thing that they're sad about.
Yeah, even if they can really acknowledge the pain or the difficulty, they have trouble really letting other people in on it, and they don't want it to impact other people. Where 4s are kind of, they intentionally want it to impact people.
Right, because they want to be seen.
Yeah, 4s want to have an impact. They want to be seen, but they don't want to be seen. Like, we have this conversation over and over again. Danielle's often like, don't perceive me. Like, you know, I might notice a pattern or something and say it, and she's like, stop perceiving me. And it's like, okay. But then if I stop perceiving her, then she's upset and wants...
Do you even care about me?
Exactly.
Why aren't you trying to perceive me?
Yeah, so that's the trap, and I think that's the real distinction between type 9 and type 4.
Sure, yeah, of course.
All this to say, I love my wife dearly, and we have a wonderful relationship, and we both bring some really challenging things to the relationship.
She's worth the moat and the alligators.
Indeed.
And the tower. Yeah. Now, you guys are both in the emotional realness, so let's dive in and talk a little bit more about the emotional realness, conflict resolution style.
Yeah. So this is, I think, interesting, and Danielle and I, so like as an 8, I am not afraid of conflict.
Right, for sure.
And, you know, part of that's the emotional realness, but there's this really interesting conflict between the emotional realness triad and the withdrawn stance, because 4s, they want the fight, they want the conflict, but they don't feel particularly equipped to show up to it. So there is, much like we feel that that gap or that conflict between the withdrawn stance and their idealism, the same thing is happening with the emotional realness, right? So Danielle and I's relationship has been very, we'd like to say that we front loaded all of the like conflict in the first few years of our relationship. Because truly we were both very high conflict types. And I think that's the difference. 4s will often report being conflict averse. But if you've ever been around a 4 long enough, a real 4, they will try and start fights all the time.
But not fully own it.
Exactly. They won't own it. It's not direct. It's like they're starting a fight from like coming around the backside, right? They're going to like outflank you, and they're going to like launch a sneak attack. Sometimes it's even a sneak attack to themselves, right? Because they don't want to full on directly engage in conflict, which is much more comfortable for me.
Right.
Where Danielle will try and come at it from like these other sides, like, oh, well, I'm just trying to like let myself be heard, or I'm just trying to this, or I'm just trying to that. And it's like, no, I don't want to. I've gotten to the point now where it's like, well, I don't want to fight. And so I won't fight with you. And then that creates a new conflict. That Danielle's trying to start a fight and I won't do it.
It's almost like you have this intense emotional realness.
Yeah.
But you're a withdrawing type. And so while you're withdrawing, things kind of come out like a little sideways, or there's like a shot from the retreat.
Yeah.
you know, like so that they'll know why you're retreating.
Exactly. We're like eights want to
They're
engage.
coming at you.
Well, eights want to engage in hand-to-hand combat.
Sure. Yeah.
Where fours want to engage in a drone strike. Right? They want to be in another country, but they want to be manning the controls and like dropping bombs on all of us who can't do anything about it. So I think there's like a difference in the way that fours engage in conflict that really sets them apart from these other types who are either more direct in their conflict or are much more conflict averse, truly.
Right. But even though fours are that withdrawing type, they still are in that emotional realness triad. And so they do need to feel eventually, before they can really feel that conflict is resolved, they need to feel like heard. They've seen and heard, and you understand what happened here.
Yeah, which is especially hard when they also don't want to be seen or perceived or understood, right? So this is a big piece for fours. They don't want to be understood. They want to intentionally obscure what they're thinking or feeling because they believe that if they were understood, then they would no longer be quote unquote special. And I think it's when we switching gears a little bit into like the growth for type 4, there's a really big step in growth of understanding that like as a 4, you are not as different as you think you are.
It sounds so mean.
Well, and I mean, the same thing goes, I could say the same thing for I could say something similar around like 8s. You're not as strong as you think you are, you know, like, yeah, I know, right? Like these, like bombs.
Don't do the 7.
Okay, I won't. I'll hold off.
It's coming.
We just got a few more episodes. But what I mean in that is that like, you know, you are unique the way a snowflake is unique and every other snowflake is also unique, right? Like there are going to be particular things about you and your experience that yes, absolutely are different than everyone else. But there is more to you that is similar to those around you than there is different. And you're spending a lot of time cultivating the image of the parts of you that are very different. And that's a very true and real part of you. But there is more to you that is similar and that can be understood than you're willing to admit. And I think 4 is taking that in. It's a hard sell.
Yeah. I feel like my positive outlook is at war with your emotional realness because I would have almost gone the other direction. Like all the 4s that I know who are afraid they're not unique enough or like lovely enough are so fucking awesome and lovely.
Well, and that is also true.
You need to understand you're already there. You don't have to keep this endless cycle of curating and trying to figure out like, how to be your unique and special self because 4s have a great handle on what makes them special. They just don't really believe it in this weird way.
See, I don't think our statements are in conflict.
Okay, good.
Like, I think that those are both very, very true statements about the 4, that they really are unique. They do have a very unique perspective.
Yeah.
I think maybe what I'm trying to get at is that, maybe this will bring the two together.
Yeah.
Just because you are unique does not mean
you can't be known.
You can't be known. And that you can't be understood.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yes.
That was a good one. Wow, we really brought that around. I'm real proud of that. Just being real honest in the moment here. And I think if you have 4s in your life, things to be mindful. I feel like I've shared a lot about my marriage.
I mean, it makes sense. You know your 4 very intimately.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, if there are 4s in your life, knowing that like, it's important to see how they're different. It's important to encourage them to take action. It's important to hold them accountable to their own desires and the things that are important to them, because that withdrawn stance really does tend to hold them back.
Sure.
And 4s really do need a lot of space. They're kind of like cats in that, like, you don't want to go directly at them. You want to, like, You want to pretend like you don't see them and let them come to you. That's a good, if there's emotional things coming up, that's a generally good approach.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask you, do you think when a 4 is saying like, don't perceive me, is the better thing to continue to perceive them or to like back off and not perceive them, even though you know that ultimately the desire is to be perceived?
Yeah. So what I have learned in my years of experience is actually you continue to perceive them, and you let it be known that you see and understand them in different ways. So, and this is, work for anybody with a 4 in their life, that like, it's a slow process, right? But like, there are ways that it's true. Like, 4s want to be known. Their desire is to be known and understood. And then there's this big fear that says that they can't be known or understood. And so you're really combating that fear. We haven't even talked about shame, even though that's the emotional filter for 4s. We'll probably do another episode later, but all of these things are related deeply to shame, right? That they feel ashamed for their difference, or for their sameness or whatever it might be.
Both, really.
Yeah. Both,
and
really.
That's in that heart center. We skipped over it in the center. But.
They kind of feel ashamed for existing, is a way to put it, which is, it's painful, right? It's sad.
Yeah.
But you continue to perceive the 4, and then you just kind of alter how you're sharing that information.
Yeah,
like,
that makes a lot of sense.
You can't, like I said, like they're like cats. You can't come directly at them and like try to pet them. They'll run off into the other room. But you step back. You give them space, and then there's a lot more safety for those things that you've perceived in them to like come to light, and you can respond to them differently.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Anything else we should chat about in these last couple minutes?
I just think that we should just say again how great 4s are. I feel like some of our, like, I think
we
for an assertive,
real high and we went real low, and now we're going to try and come back up.
Like we've talked, I think for our typology, it's like, wow, it's just so sad. But there's a lot of things that are just actually just so lovely also.
True.
And the intensity and the beauty, it's very enjoyable for the people that are in relationship with the 4s, I think.
Yeah. As long as those people can hack it.
As long as we can hack it.
Legit. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Abby Robbins. You can find all of my stuff at consciousenneagram.com, Instagram at consciousenneagram, etc., etc., etc.
Yep, and we're at KimberlyandCoach.com, and you can find us at Kimberly and Coach on Instagram as well.
Awesome. And we'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.
Cheers.